I think, an immediate applicable thing that nobody was, at least I wasn't paying much attention to, was this development of the mRNA vaccine. I mean, imagine where we would be today if people hadn't done work 20 years ago, starting on how you can inject mRNA and let it survive.
Yes.
And then they're ready to put it all together in the middle of a pandemic. Right?
Yes. Yes.
It'd be better. Good morning, Lalita.
Good morning. Professor Sommer, you're on time. I think I've joined late. Hello, Dr. Kannan. Hello, Dr. Muralidharan.
Hi. Professor Dr. Vijaya Rao. She is a virologist, one of our early breeds of PhD in virology.
Right.
Well, this is her day.
Very true with COVID and all that.
COVID, gosh. It's really something.
Ma'am, you are muted. Can you unmute yourself? Dr. Vijaya Rao, kindly unmute yourself.
Namaskara, Dr. Vijaya Rao.
I think you're still muted.
Yeah. Can you unmute yourself, Vijaya Rao?
Dr. Rao, you're muted. I mean, you're talking, but your video is muted.
Yeah, now we can.
Right.
Vijaya Rao made, she was in the Defense Food Research Laboratory.
All right. In Mysore.
In Mysore, yes. And she was one of the people who was involved in making the food for our first astronaut, Rakesh Sharma. So, and when things were not that well developed, and she managed to make the food for him.
Long story, long ago, Kannan.
Yes, I know. But today, what we are going to hear about Sommer is also what he did in the 70s and 80s. So,
we are so fortunate that he himself is there. I think this is incredible.
Yes.
We can't imagine. Really, thank you, Professor Sommer.
No, I'm honored that you chose to do this, Dr. Bhattacharjee.
I met you in 2003, if you remember, but that was a long time ago.
Yes. Well, that's not so long ago, compared
to Sommer worked in Bangladesh during the Liberation War, and he has seen the worst cyclone there, worst cholera epidemic, and how he helped the people, that he was honored by the Bangladesh government as the friend of Bangladesh. And he came all the way from America, not taking up a Johns Hopkins University position. He came back and worked in. It's a very unusual example of how crazy people can get. See, pardon my saying that, sir, but
no, you're absolutely right. My wife and I look back on those days, and those were, very, very interesting days of ours. Some of the most exciting times we've ever spent. But we think about, if our children ever did that, we sort of go back in the middle of a civil war and a cyclone disaster and a smallpox epidemic, and we'd say they're crazy. What we can't get over is that our parents never objected. And we had their only grandchild at the time. And then we had their two only grandchildren at the time. And, one is 2.5 and one is 3 months old. I'll tell you a funny story, but then I guess you really have to get going, Lalita.
No, there is a bit of time. There is still time.
I was going to tell you, so I'm the director of the smallpox eradication program after the War for Independence. I'm only there for 3 months, but I'm sent there to set up smallpox activities. And then my wife and our 3-month-old and our 2-year-old joined me the last month I'm there. And then the day we go to leave, and there's only one flight a week from Dhaka to Delhi. That's the only way to get out. We get to the airport on a Sunday. We get to the airport in plenty of time, go through all the check things. And then this young man comes out from nowhere and wants to see our vaccination card. But usually you look at the vaccination card when you come into the country. You don't look at the vaccination card when you go out of the country. And so he looks at the vaccination card and he points to my 3-month-old daughter, this little baby, and says, she can't leave.
Oh, wow.
So, what do you mean she can't leave? She's got the smallpox vaccination and it's a stamp. It is true because my wife was rushing to get on the flight and get there. She had the stamp, but you're supposed to check 1 week later to see that there's going to be an eruption. Well, she has this big scar there. So I say to him, it's true. It's true. She didn't go back. She didn't have time to go back and check. But look, she has a scar there. And he says to me, well, we don't know how old that was. I said, how old can it have been? Fortunately, very fortunately, and it was a Sunday, that he had a telephone, a regular telephone, that the telephone actually worked, which was very unusual, and that the Secretary of Health, whom I knew personally, was at home and his phone worked. So we only got on that flight because we could call from his phone, which usually didn't work, the Secretary of Health of Bangladesh, who said, no, let them get on the airplane.
Yes, I think it happens over there.
These things happen all the time.
But I think ICDDRB remembers you with fond memories even now.
Yeah, ICRB. Well, you know, it's always hard for me to say that because I used to call it the cholera lab, right?
Yes, yes. So how are we doing in terms of time, Professor Kannan?
We'll give it 5 minutes because people are just checking in. So let me give a,
Oh, wow. Martin has joined. Hello, Martin. Good morning.
Yeah, there's Martin. There's Martin.
Wow, this is impressive.
Wherever he might be. So I did send yesterday, I did let some people here know. There he is.
Very good. Martin Bloom is another huge contributor to the vitamin A and nutrition surveillance program in Bangladesh in many places with HKI affiliations and World Food Program and of course with FAO as well. So,
but he's now at Hopkins.
I know. I think we met at the IFPRI conference, if you remember, Martin.
Yeah. Of course, I remember. It's good to see you.
Very nice of you to join, Martin. It's our pleasure to have your company.
Dr. Martin Bloom and of course Dr. Professor Krishnamoorthy, who is the chair of this think tank, the founder of this think tank where young scientists are joining.
I'm really pleased to be here.
Oh, thank you so much.
To,
yeah.
The interesting talks.
Yes. I think
if I do justice to this, I have to just.
No. Yeah, I think you will.
But we must reduce it when we have people like Alfred Sommer and Martin. I think I might as well take a back seat.
Certainly, they can add to the discussion.
Yes. Keith West is also there, I think, right?
Yes,
yeah.
Keith is there. Yes.
He had come to our nutrition. Hello.
Good evening.
Hello, Keith. It's been a long time.
It's been a while, but you look lovely.
I've come away. I've retired from FAO. I'm now in Bangkok, working as an advisor with FAO again.
Oh.
Yes.
Starting a new career.
We wish we all could have been in Bangkok.
Well, I think they use retirees and some work with IFAD. So. Okay. So
I think you can start, Lalita. I'll just introduce you so that you could begin, and then we will continue.
I need your help in this window.
Okay.
I have this.
Yeah. So it's a pleasure to welcome all of you. Such a galaxy of experts being present here. Let me just briefly introduce KKBiotech. Essentially, has been created to help the students benefit from knowing what others have done and how ideas are brought about. And today we thought we will talk about Alfred Sommer's work because the kind of approach he took without much facilities, without much diagnostics possible, the kind of things we do today to COVID, I think Alfred has done a tremendous job, and I'm sure Lalita is going to talk at great length about how we went about doing it in, Indonesia, Bangladesh, the whole range of places which he has worked. I don't want to preempt what Lalita is going to present today, but I will talk about Lalita briefly because she is a person, kind of wearing very many hats. Currently, she did a PhD and in Mumbai, and is a senior nutrition and public health expert with a professional career spanning 42 years. Her work encompasses research, teaching, and policy, and she has worked in academy in India and in Thailand for over 20 years, and nearly for 20 years with the Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN, guiding nutrition and public health linked strategies in Bangladesh, India, selected states, Laos, Rome, Sri Lanka, and Thailand. She now serves as a senior nutrition advisor, retiree expert, as she just now said, to FAO and to other UN agencies. She has provided technical guidance and support to planning and implementing nutrition research that has led to evidence for informing policies, setting nutrient targets for agriculture and health sector. The evidence generated helped to integrate a nutrition orientation for nutrition sensitive policies, improve diets for various economic groups, and demonstrate nutrition and health outcomes while enhancing the advocacy and investment for nutrition among developing partners and multiple sectors of the government. Some of the lessons learned are being applied in many countries. Dr. Bhattacharjee has successfully led, guided, and technically supported intervention in Asian countries on integrated agriculture and health for improved nutrition, horticulture, and nutrition development. Integrated home gardening for nutrition, school nutrition, and food safety and nutrition, leading to the improvement of cooking practices, healthy food combinations, household, maternal, and young children's diets, and nutrition impact. She has designed, planned, and delivered several technical trainings and orientation on diet and food-based nutrition related issues across agriculture and health sectors, civil society organization, and academy in collaboration with renowned agriculture, public health, and nutrition institutions in India. For all her work in Bangladesh, Dr. Bhattacharjee has been the recipient of FAO's biennial BR Sen Award for 2014 in recognition of outstanding contribution towards improvement in food-based nutrition in Bangladesh. So thank you, Lalita, for joining, and we look forward to hearing from you, and followed by Professor Alfred Sommer, who is going to add on to some other points. So welcome, Dr. Lalita. Any problem sharing?
You're muted, Lalita.
Any problem, Lalita, sharing?
This is usual for these kinds of things. But you are muted. It shows that you are on mute.
Lalita, go on that arrow. Go on that arrow again. Lalita, unmute yourself. Unmute yourself. Just unmute yourself, yeah.
Comfortably on that cushion.
Minute
Huh? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yes.
So now let me
Yeah.
now.
Press the arrow.
Yeah, I don't know why this is happening. Okay.
No, don't worry. Don't get tense. It's okay. Yeah.
Now I have to
Click on that image of yours, that box which is coming, no? Where you have uploaded, no? On the left-hand side.
Is it okay? Have you all seen?
No, we can't see yours.
Oh God, what happened?
Don't worry, don't worry.
Wait, Lalita, I'm not used to this system, but we did see a big white blank thing. So
Yes.
maybe you have to go back to what you just did and advance the slide.
Shall I send it to you? Do you want to present from there? Shall I do it right away?
No, just 1 minute. You just go to the arrow, press the
Yes.
arrow, then click on the entire screen if you want.
Yes.
Then when the screen appears,
You say
press
share.
on that entire, it will not show share till you press there. Yeah, now show your slide, no? You have not uploaded your slide. Don't stop.
Okay. Just a minute. I don't know why this is happening. Okay.
Yesterday it was okay.
Now shall I say share?
Present, yeah.
I say share.
Present now, press that button.
Share, I'll press share.
No, you press that one. You will get a window. You press the window, no?
Yes.
The second one, did you press?
This one?
There will be 3, no? One is called your entire screen. The second is a window. Third is a tab, no? So press on the second one, a window.
Yes, I did that.
Then now that window, then you press on that window, there will be some image coming so that you can share your slide.
One thing is coming. Wait, I'll say share. You are presenting your screen now.
Yes, press on that screen. Yeah. Is it saying share now?
It says stop sharing, stop presenting. I don't know what happened.
Ignore it.
Wait, let me. 1 second. Now, can you see anything at all?
Nothing we can see. Don't worry. Be calm.
Okay, what do I do? Let me send this to you right now by email. That's the only solution. I don't know any other way to.
No, you can still send, but you can still try. Present now.
1 minute. So what is your email? KK?
You put a Kannan @KKBiotech.net, or you send it to other one, Dr. Krishnamoorthy@gmail.com.
Yeah, okay. Let me do that. That might be the best thing to do because this is very.
No, don't get panic, but just try it once more.
I'm sending it to you. Because I don't know what's going on. I did it yesterday and this was very funny, extremely strange. Okay, let me try again. Present now.
Yeah,
Okay,
present now.
I go to entire screen.
No, go to the middle one.
Window. Okay, good.
Window.
Now I go to the screen. And then I say share.
Yeah.
And then I say share.
Yeah. Now you shared your slide. You have not shared your slide, no?
Okay, let me do it again. Okay, okay, fine. I'm very sorry. This is the most.
No, don't worry.
Do you have your slideshow open and on its first slide?
Shall I
did you reduce this thing on your screen?
1 minute.
Where is your slide?
Wait.
No, where is your slide right now?
It's on my desktop. It's right there.
So you open it and reduce it. You open it and reduce it.
Okay, great. Okay, I've done that. Now I'll come back.
Now you start sharing.
Yes, okay.
Present.
No, I'll go to
present.
Now I go to present. I go to window. I come here. Then I say share.
Yeah. Now share your this thing. Yeah.
Oh dear. Now
go to that this thing. No, is it showing share?
I don't know, I keep saying to avoid mirroring, don't share your entire screen or browser
No,
window.
don't worry about mirroring. Don't worry about that.
You are,
Are you getting a thing share?
no, I did all that. It's test.
No. It should suddenly show you share.
I did that. I saw that and I did it.
Then where is your slide?
Excuse me, Dr. Lalita, could you please open the PowerPoint first? Then you can go to the share. Then it will open.
Okay, now?
No, you get open the PowerPoint first.
I opened it. I've opened it.
Oh.
Maybe say ignore.
Shall I?
No.
Ignore? Okay.
Yeah.
Now we are seeing your screen. So now open the PowerPoint on your screen.
Now? Can you see?
No.
I can't see it still.
No, I have.
Oh my goodness.
So what you do is you just send it to me now.
I sent it. I've already sent it about 5 minutes ago.
Okay. I'll just check it up. Just hold on.
My goodness, this is the most. I'm
No,
very,
don't
very
worry.
sorry.
No, it doesn't matter. Don't worry.
I've never had this problem. I've been doing so many Zoom calls. My goodness. It's very embarrassing. Dr. Sommer, please forgive me.
No,
Don't worry.
Happens to me all the time.
Oh gosh. I think this is a bit of a difficult program. This, I don't know.
Don't worry. Let me just check up.
I really don't know what's wrong.
No, don't worry. Just give me a few minutes.
Okay. Anyway, okay, let me at least begin. Professor Dr. Kannan Krishnamoorthy, founder KKBiotech and chair, students and teachers of the Biotechnology Education Club and the larger fraternity of young students, scientists in biotechnology, nutrition and public health, and above all, the living legend himself, Dr. Professor Alfred Sommer, in whose honor this talk is being given. A very good evening to all of you in India and colleagues across the world from Thailand, and a wonderful morning to Professor Sommer in Baltimore, our good friend and scientist, Dr. Martin Bloom, Keith West, and many others from the United States who have been part of this vitamin A journey and micronutrient journey across the world. I'm delighted to be giving this talk in honor of Dr. Alfred Sommer. This lecture is a tribute to Alfred Sommer, whose work has touched lives across the globe with his seminal discovery on vitamin A that has impacted child nutrition and health with public health lessons for tomorrow. It is an honor for me to be giving this talk, and I thank Professor Dr. Kannan for inviting me to do the honors. I am humbled with the presence of Dr. Alfred Sommer, who has kindly agreed to attend this talk and accepted our request to reach out to the young students and scientists on a Saturday morning. This speaks volumes of the man. These are our true guides and mentors. Dr. Sommer and Professor Kannan, with your kind permission, I will now begin my lecture. Let me now first apologize for this faux pas that I've had. I don't know what I did, okay? I'm really sorry. Is it starting?
Yeah, just 2 minutes.
Okay.
Just 2 minutes.
I will try to cut it down because we've lost 10 minutes thanks to
don't worry.
Okay. I've divided the talk into some 7 components or 6 components. First is introduction to vitamin A. I don't have to carry coal to Newcastle, so I will really skip that. Alfred Sommer, the living legend. I will talk about him, and he's right here in front of us. Dr. Sommer's journey across the developing world, notably from the United States to Indonesia, Nepal, Bangladesh, and his seminal work on vitamin A deficiency and child mortality in Indonesia and Nepal, the vitamin A supplementation prophylaxis, related discoveries by Alfred Sommer that have impacted child nutrition and health, the smallpox surveillance and control in Bangladesh, and public health lessons for tomorrow's leaders. There are 10 of them. I have not been able to read all of them, but I will ask Professor Sommer to summarize them. And of course, the recognition and accolades which Dr. Sommer has got, and conclusions. I've tried to summarize them into 4 major parts. as his contributions to today's world and beyond. And now, vitamin A, as we all know, is an essential nutrient. We call it a micronutrient, and this is needed in small amounts, as we know, for the normal functioning of the eye, the visual system, indeed cellular integrity, epithelial integrity, hematopoiesis, immunity, and reproduction. So we all know that. And among the micronutrient deficiencies in the world, there are three major ones we talk about. There are several, but we talk about vitamin A, we talk about anemia, iron deficiency anemia, and the other forms of anemia, and certainly iodine deficiency disorders. And these are largely prevalent in the developing world and in developing societies, low-income countries, Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Now, although vitamin A deficiency is found to affect from the womb to the tomb, as we say, it certainly affects the first 1,000 days of life, pregnant and lactating women, more specifically those living in the poor regions.
Can you see the slide?
No, not really. I have a feeling today,
No.
because yesterday we did a dry run and it came out quite well.
Yeah. Just 1 minute.
Anyway, based on available estimates, we haven't got. In fact, I just spoke to the colleague in WHO, and we unfortunately didn't have a map. So Professor Sommer's map was more helpful, and we find that about 19 million pregnant women, according to WHO, and 9.8 million people are affected by night blindness, as per available estimates. Now, with these statistics that all of us know, I don't have to go further on that. I have a map for you, which we will see when we have the slides. That largely it is the clinical vitamin A deficiency is prevalent in South Asia, with some forms of subclinical vitamin A deficiency in Southeast Asia. And in most of Africa, we have clinical, severe subclinical, and moderate subclinical vitamin A deficiency, which was found to be widely prevalent. In South America, we've had severe subclinical and moderate subclinical vitamin A deficiency, and the mild sporadic forms of vitamin A deficiency have been seen across other parts of the globe.
I think.
What shall I do? How can we?
No. Wait. I'll try to resolve it.
Okay. Then there are other basic information that most of us would know, but I had put it down on a slide where we have preformed and pro-vitamin A, preformed vitamin A and proformed vitamin A, largely what we call as retinol, retinal, and the retinoic acids available in animal source foods, which are eggs, meat, cheese, milk products, organ meats, kidney, fish, especially the bony fish and the small fish that you eat along with the head, and plant sources, which have a multitude of functions apart from just giving you vitamin A. And today, there is a lot of work going on with the healthy diet that we talk about, including the Lancet, the Eat Lancet Commission that has brought it out. We find that plant source foods are very important in the diet, and we can talk about the plate and divide it into 4 segments. However, from the vitamin A perspective, we have yellow-orange vegetables, leafy vegetables, both dark green leafy vegetables and the red vegetables, the yellow pumpkins and the gourds, orange sweet potato, high carotene maize, apricots, and broccoli. Now let me take you straight to Alfred Sommer. Oh God, finally. Now please go to the, I think we'll skip the first slides because I've already talked about it. Let's go to slide number 7, I believe. Slide number 7.
Yeah, just 1 minute.
Sorry, okay, I'm very sorry.
No, don't worry.
Somebody's got to mute themselves.
Tell me where to stop. Huh?
No, go further. Keep going. Yeah, after this. I think I will skip all that. So,
Yeah.
After this, the next. Let's come next.
Okay.
Yeah, the next one. I want to now straight away get down to business.
Yeah.
Next.
Okay.
Alfred Sommer, Professor Dr. Alfred Sommer, or Al Sommer, was born on October 2nd, 1942, and he's a prominent American ophthalmologist. Can we increase the view?
Yeah. Hello. It's a full screen only.
Oh, is it? Okay. Okay. And an epidemiologist at the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. And his major contribution in the 70s and the 1980s revealed that dosing even mildly vitamin A deficient children with an inexpensive large dose of vitamin A capsule twice a year reduces child mortality by as much as 34%. Indeed, today the World Bank and the Copenhagen Consensus have listed among the high-impact interventions and cost-effective health interventions vitamin A supplementation as one of them. The next.
Yeah.
Dr. Sommer's journey, his initial journey from the US to Bangladesh, Indonesia, and Nepal. As an EIS officer at the CDC, he moved with his family overseas to Bangladesh, then East Pakistan, and worked at the Cholera Research Laboratory. And we can hear from him later on as he speaks. But that was where his initial work began. And his major contribution at that time in the 70s was during the cyclone period, where in the first epidemiological investigation, which following the disaster, almost washed away 250,000 of Bangladeshis in one single night. And Dr. Alfred Sommer's contribution to public health and the interventions at that time, in fact, the government of Bangladesh bestowed upon him the Friends of Liberation War honor for his contributions. After that, I think a restless Alfred Sommer returned to the United States, continued his medical education, and then at the Johns Hopkins School, and worked at the Wilmer Eye Institute, and then with the Johns Hopkins schools, and then continued his journey from the 70s onwards to the 80s. Next. Next.
Yeah. Is that okay?
Next.
Okay.
Now, I would like to tell you a little bit about Professor Sommer's work in Indonesia. Dr. Sommer demonstrated the impact of vitamin A supplementation on childhood mortality through a randomized controlled community trial in the Aceh province, covering 22,000 children at that time in two provinces, two clusters of villages, where they had capsule versus no capsule, or the cases and the controls. Next. We can see here that in the 450 villages across northern Sumatra that were randomly assigned, where we had the cases and the controls, and over 25,000 preschool children were examined at baseline and then at the end of 1 year. And these children were given 200,000 international units vitamin A to the preschool children over a year by the local volunteers at baseline, then at 6 months later. And it was very remarkable and interesting to note that in the case of control children, the mortality was almost 49% greater than those children to whom supplements were given. And interestingly, the impact of vitamin A supplementation seemed to be greater in boys than in girls. Now, these results supported the earlier observations, which linked mild vitamin A deficiency to increased mortality, and suggested that supplements given to vitamin A deficient children might decrease the mortality by almost a third. Next. Here we have Alfred Sommer, a young doctor who's examining the eyes of the child in Indonesia and possibly giving the oral vitamin A drops. Next. Now, this is an important slide which shows the links between xerophthalmia and the risk of death, which shows that the death increases with the severity of ocular manifestations of vitamin A deficiency. The ocular manifestations, which have largely included night blindness, Bitot spots, corneal xerosis and keratomalacia, and corneal scars. This slide shows the risk of death being higher in xerophthalmic cases as compared to non-xerophthalmic children. And these xerophthalmic signs have been used as prevalence criteria for determining public health significance of xerophthalmia and vitamin A deficiency in children from the age of 6 months to 6 years. The next slide will elaborate further. Next. One can see from this slide that the mortality per 1,000 children rises with ocular signs, which was found to be low in normal children, which is as low as 5 per 1,000 children, rising to 15 in children with night blindness, to 35 per 1,000 in children with Bitot spots, and to 45 per 1,000 when signs of both night blindness and Bitot spots are present. I would appreciate Professor Sommer's insights later on at the end of this lecture on this particular issue. The next slide. The seminal work by Dr. Alfred Sommer then gained worldwide attention, and the landmark paper in the renowned Lancet journal brought to global attention Sommer's work in Indonesia with his team, Ignatius Tarvodjo and Keith West, who is right here in this meeting. At this point, I would like to become a bit nostalgic and go back to the 1980s, to the mid-1980s, to the 1986, 84, 86, when I was pursuing my PhD and was inspired by Alfred Sommer's work. I remember paying £20 and buying his book, Nutritional Blindness in Edinburgh. Dr. Donald McLaren inspired me and talked about, he said, Al Sommer's work. And I remember clearly Dr. McLaren telling me, and I bought that book. And those days, the work inspired, I used it as a little Bible at that time, the black book with the white mark on it on nutritional blindness. And further on, meeting other people and inspired by work on the dark adaptation studies by Dr. Sakon Dhanamita, guided a little bit by my late professor, Dr. Sumati Mudambi, Dr. McLaren, the late Kalyan Bakchi, who was WHO advisor, Dr. Gopalan, the late Gopalan, the father of nutrition, Gopa Kochari, and several others. But I bow to you, Dr. Sommer, that your work certainly guided me in my with the work on slum children in Bombay, in Maharashtra, where I looked at the dietary factors which contribute to vitamin A deficiency, looking at food-based approaches, which was changing the situation in India and other countries across the world. We also looked at impression cytology, which was a reliable test modifying the work done by Singh, looking at buccal mucosa, and we found correlations between buccal mucosa and vitamin A deficiency, even in subclinical cases. That was a long time ago. But you have truly been a motivation and inspired many, including my students who did PhD letters, so they've remembered you. Next. Now, coming specifically to the vitamin A supplementation in Nepal by Dr. Alfred Sommer, it was found that vitamin A and beta-carotene supplementation on Nepalese children, Nepalese women, especially in the 14 to 49 age group, demonstrated a 45% decline in the maternal mortality rate. So you can see that the results are becoming consistent. And further on, in neonates, the impact of dosing was found that when they were deficient, supplementation repeatedly demonstrated the reduction in mortality by almost 10 to 20%. This was in Nepal. Next. Now these bars, this figure is important, where the work in Nepal across 4-month intervention trials demonstrated lower mortality per 1,000 children where vitamin A dosing was given versus a placebo, where the relative risks were lower in all cases when the vitamin A supplementation was given, as you can clearly see. And I would request Professor Sommer again to comment and elaborate on this slide at the end of the talk. But more important, we can see the consistency and the reduction in the 4-month trials between the supplementation and the placebo doses. Next. Here you have Alfred Sommer with his team in the field camp in Nepal. Next. Meta-analysis was carried out. Alfred Sommer's work stirred a lot, I would say, both attention, contribution to policy changes, and some degree of controversy with reference to many other studies. But more importantly, it stirred the stage, and this was on the world agenda. Meta-analysis of field trial outcomes in countries pointed to a consistent reduction in relative mortality risk. And I think this is the seminal work that we need to look at in children with low-dose vitamin A and control children. The work by Sommer in both Indonesia and Nepal, as you can see in the Aceh province and in West Java, showed a mortality risk reduction by about a third. In West Java, it was about 46%. While in Madurai, India, we find the studies by Rahmatullah demonstrated a reduction by almost half, 52%. While the study in Hyderabad NIN did not show marked reductions, in fact, very low reductions, just about 7%, whereas the work in Nepal, again, corroborate the work done by Sommer, showed a decline by about a third. The important message from this meta-analysis is that the relative mortality risk reduces with vitamin A supplementation across varying ranges. And I think this was the important contribution which has been repeatedly demonstrated. Next. I will now take you quickly to some other pioneering discoveries by Dr. Alfred Sommer, being a field specialist in public health right on the ground, where vitamin A and related child nutrition studies have led to major advances in global healthcare policies. Now, along with several other authors who had carried out work on the mid-upper arm circumference, Dr. Sommer used this and demonstrated in the field that it was a simple and effective tool for conducting nutrition surveillance. And he identified that those children who were at risk of dying from wasting and acute malnutrition indeed could be identified by this simple technique. He also found that easily assessed appearance of the nerve fiber layer in the retina is an early accurate predictor of glaucomatous optic nerve damage. And this was important in initiating the need for glaucoma therapy. His contribution also in the vaccination for smallpox in the field has also been some of his contributions in the impacting child health. Next. The slide is a little small. I hope you can see it. It's a bit wordy, but I still need to put this across. In about 1,384 smallpox children in smallpox cases in Bangladesh, in Khulna locality, which was studied, you can see the details. Dr. Sommer showed that within 3 weeks of instituting surveillance and containment activities, they were able to bring the epidemic to control. And over 84 cases of all new cases who were estimated, they were able to look at the number of registered the cases that had died, burials with the observed case fatality rate. And it was found that 90% of the family contacts of detected cases were vaccinated during the home visits. Only 75% who were vaccinated at that time, but there was intrafamilial transmission essentially ceased during that particular time, which was an important finding. Ultimately, the important point, the message is that vaccination performed after that time still reduced the clinical attack rate on an average by about 50%. The results suggested that selective epidemiological control can be effective in aborting these intense herbal smallpox cases and epidemics. Next. A little attention on child wasting and acute malnutrition, because currently as we speak, amidst the COVID pandemic, the prevalence of child wasting has increased in many countries. And as we are aware, reducing all forms of malnutrition, including child malnutrition, child stunting, and wasting, is one of the SDG goals number 2. Target 2.2.2 is for reducing child wasting. And we are expected to reduce child wasting as per the World Health Assembly goals to less than 5% by 2020 and almost eliminate it by 2030, which seems a bit far-fetched given the increasing food insecurity as well as the child wasting due to the COVID pandemic. But that's another issue and we can talk about it. Largely, the assessment of child wasting is important in situations where there is food in short supply, which was prevalent at that time when Al Sommer, Martin Bloom, Keith West and others were working at that time. And it was found by Alfred Sommer and the co-workers that MUAC was an easy proxy to assess child wasting at a sensitivity of 20% in the field. It was easy to measure in thin arms, and it can be measured up to a sensitivity of 1 millimeter. Basically, it gives an indication of the degree of wasting, that is, low weight for height, and it's a good predictor of mortality. Next, and indeed, wasting is used to detect and identify children for therapeutic feeding purposes. Now, when we understand wasting, the most important point that we would like to really mention is that it is a predictor of, as we can look at, in terms of looking at the number of cases who are lean, who are measured by the mid-upper arm circumference tape, and then you divide them into, it's a result of recent weight loss, as we really say. And there are different categories. I will not go into that because this lecture is not about wasting, but we have GAM, or the global acute malnutrition, that is the combining both moderate and acute, severe acute, and we have moderate acute malnutrition, and we have severe acute malnutrition. The important point is we have to identify the cases of SAM which are really at the risk of death. MAM and GAM, yes, they can be rehabilitated with other forms of food interventions, but it's the SAM children who really require therapeutic feeding. And indeed, in countries like Africa and in Bangladesh as well, and in other countries, SAM cases were rather high, and this is being addressed. Next, I want you to see on the right-hand side the little picture. It's not very clear. Here we have the tape from the next one, please. We have the tape that is from the talc teaching aids at low cost. Most of you know about this in London, in England. The mid-upper arm circumference tape is a simple and reliable method, and it can be used with training by all health workers. And here we have the categorization of severe acute malnutrition, less than 11.5 centimeters in the mid-arm, moderate acute malnutrition, 11.5 to 12 centimeters, that is the yellowish-orange color, and normal children, that is 12.5 and above, or 12.5. So these were the cutoffs which were used to identify children, age-independent, on the ground, at the field, to carry out surveillance for assessing acute malnutrition. And this was one of the contributions which today has become an important public health measure of assessment and surveillance in the field at regular intervals. Next. Well, now, MUAC application in child nutrition assessment with reference to Alfred Sommer's work, where he had looked at over 8,000 rural Bengali children in Bangladesh. I think this again was in Khulna, if I'm not mistaken. And it was found that 2.3% of the children had died. And those in the 9th and 10th and 50th percentile had arm circumference for height at 3.4 and 1.5 times higher and with the risk of dying compared to those above the 50th percentile. These were important findings. During the first post-measurement month, the risk of dying among the poorest nutritional category was 19.8 times than of the best for the first 3 months. And for the first 12 months, 12.2 times. And it was also noted at that time that females in all 3 categories first fared worse than the males, being 1.1 times with the risk of dying. Eventually, the important point is that this MUAC to height categories and the quack test survey technique to which they were later on used, they were found to be valid tools for identifying nutritionally disadvantaged children, notably wasting, and to identify children at risk of death or mortality. I think this is a very, very important contribution in the field of child nutrition and public health on the ground. Next. Now, this is from Alfred Sommer's book itself, The 10 Lessons in Public Health. I think there are several of them, but we can categorize them. At the end, I have just put 4 important areas where the contributions can be seen, and I will ask Professor Sommer to really mention it. Next, please. Here you have Professor Sommer with the team on the ground, and I think you can see amidst work the beaming faces and the appearance of satisfaction at the work that is being done with the field van. Next, please. This is an important slide which gives you which kind of tells you largely the role of vitamin A deficiency and the categorization and the correlations, or rather the contributions of vitamin A deficiency or the work of Alfred Sommer with vitamin A status having significant correlations with clinical implications that impact morbidity, mortality, micronutrient deficiency states, and growth. You can see here that it brings about systemic effects with increased infections, increased mortality, increased anemia, and certainly impacting growth, reduced growth in the case of vitamin A deficiency. As regards ocular effect, which I mentioned earlier, the effects, the manifestations are seen through the classical xerophthalmic signs, namely night blindness and the spectrum of xerophthalmia and keratomalacia signs. Today, it's very important to note that we do not have signs of night blindness, Bitot spots, as much as we used to see them. I personally remember seeing night blindness, xerophthalmia, and the children with keratomalacia in the Bombay slums. And it's very important to note that in the field, conditions like night blindness used to be taken as a normal routine in pregnancy. And this was due to cultural beliefs and several things. Measles was considered to be the visitation of the goddess, and it was being ignored. Measles was known as the bigger goddess, and chickenpox was known as the smaller goddess. And in this situation, in this scenario, in this environment, Alfred Sommer and co-workers have worked and brought about these changes and made contributions in the field. So we've come a very long way, thanks to living legends and to Alfred Sommer, who's here today with us. Next, please. This is an important slide, and I would like to take a minute to talk about this. Here we can see the retinol equivalent availability for consumption per capita from mixed food supplies across the world, from both preformed as well as provitamin A. Now, there have been a range of conversion factors of beta-carotene to retinol applied by these three sources, the FAO, WHO, IOM, and Keith West, C. West. Using these conversions, that is 1 microgram of vitamin A value equal to 1 microgram retinol, 1 microgram beta-carotene equal to 0.5 micrograms of retinol, and 1 microgram of other total mixed carotenoids is equal to 0.25 micrograms of retinol. The first bar, that is Europe, the wealthy countries, Europe and US, they are highest and have adequate supplies, as you can see, meeting the recommended dietary allowances or the recommended nutrient intake. The second bar, that is Africa, where some now seem inadequate, that is the second group. And the third group, that is all but West is inadequate, that is South America. And the fourth set, that is Asia, where all but the West are grossly inadequate. Indeed, if everyone got their vitamin A share, which we know they don't, and Asia. So you can see that the world food supplies, as per the calculations, is variable across the 4 regions of the world: Europe, Africa, South America, and Asia. We can have a discussion on this at the end of this talk, because this is important, especially today as we speak about food systems, leveraging agriculture for nutrition, food-based approaches, and several other dimensions which are related to the larger issue of micronutrients, as well as other non-ocular symptoms of vitamin A deficiency, and for the healthy diet and for preventing micronutrient deficiencies, prevention and control. Next. This is Vitamin A Supplementation, A Decade of Progress by UNICEF, in which Professor Sommer's work has been captured. Next, please. Now, there are about several recognitions, awards, and accolades. I've listed some. I've taken this from the online sources, as you can see. Albert's Lasker Award for Clinical Medicine and Medical Research in the 1977. You can read it. Danone International Prize, Dan David Prize, Helen Keller Prize. Martin Bloom is here. He can ratify that. Then we have the Duke Elder Award. We have the Poland Prize, several of them. And I would like to specially make a mention of the Prince Mahidol Award. When I was in Thailand at that time, when Dr. Alfred Sommer traveled to Thailand and received the prestigious Prince Mahidol Award from the King of Thailand, to none other than the King of Thailand. So these are some of the great recognitions that the world has bestowed upon him. And Dr. Sommer, we are indeed grateful to you for all this work that you have done. In conclusion, I would like to end by saying, next please. When you look at Alfred Sommer's work, I know I haven't done justice to his work. I've pretty much read out what I had put together in the slides. But speaking from the heart and speaking from the work and across the journey of nutrition that all of us have been involved in, I would say in a line that Alfred Sommer's work has touched the lives of people across the globe. And it is this relevance and application of Al Sommer's research that has resulted, or which has contributed to 4 major areas, if I may simplify it: improved child survival and blindness prevention strategies. Indeed, with other approaches, but this was an important seminal contribution in its contribution to showing the correlations with reducing child mortality and morbidity. Micronutrient interventions, we have 4 or 5 of them: food-based approaches, dietary improvement, food fortification, supplementation, and we have biofortification. Several of them we can discuss and have a debate on it. But one of the major contributions has been vitamin A supplementation, which is today still used throughout the world for young children. The epidemiology and ophthalmology related interventions for improving child health, indeed, again, very important, which now goes on further to adult health with cataracts, macular degeneration, and several other problems of the eye. And indeed, the early work on diagnosis and management of glaucoma. With this, I would like to end this little talk. And I apologize, Professor Sommer and the entire audience, for the slip up that I had to do at the beginning of this lecture. But with this little journey that I've taken you through, largely talking about Sommer's work, I will now give the floor to Professor Sommer. With your permission, Dr. Kannan, I have a few questions which I thought would help us to guide the discussion.
Excellent.
And Professor Sommer, we would urge you and be grateful if you can kindly give us your insights and your thoughts on this work. If you will allow me, I will stop now, Professor Krishnamoorthy. And the floor is now to Dr. Sommer.
Yeah, thank you, Lalita.
Questions.
Yeah, sure.
Well, first of all, let me thank you all for this wonderful recognition, and to Dr. Bhattacharjee in particular for trying to summarize a life of work, which is not easy to do, but I think you did a wonderful job. So thank you very much for doing that. I think if anybody could get anything from that, you can see I have been all over the place. Not only geographically, but in the research work that I've done. So I've tried to think about that at this stage of life is, how in the world did I get involved in so many totally different issues? So I've come up with an acronym. It's not the best acronym. I have to think of a new acronym, but it's SPAC, S-P-A-C, SPAC. Which is now a new, apparently, way to invest money, but I have nothing to do with investing money. So the SPAC, the S is C, which means every time we're in a new situation, we see things that we've never seen before. The P is ponder. So we see new things, and some of them make us think, well, why is that? Exactly. Why, so we're pondering what we're seeing for the first time. The A is for act. That is, if something that you're pondering and seeing says, I don't know, that doesn't sound right to me, or there's something interesting here, you think about it. And then if it really looks interesting and you think you have an insight, then you act. So that's the SPA. And then once you act, as many of you know, and lots of people who you've mentioned, and some of whom are on the screen with us were clearly very important in all the work that I did. They did that work with me, is we found we had, to our satisfaction, proven things. We had acted, done these studies, there was no question in our mind, and lots of people simply didn't believe it. So the C for SPAC is you've got to convince people about the importance of the data. And in the vitamin A, for giving more vitamin A, that moment came by having a meeting in Bellagio, and where we brought together, we could only have 22 people or so. That's all that you could have at a meeting then at the Rockefeller center in Bellagio. And we had 5 days, and we only asked 4 questions. Is vitamin A deficiency bad for children? Is giving them vitamin A, will that improve their health and reduce their mortality? And then also we got onto this business of treating children with measles with vitamin A, because there was a high measles mortality rate, particularly in Africa, not seen in the subcontinent, but seen in Africa. And we all went through all that data, all 20 people. Some had nothing to do with vitamin A, but they were experts in child survival. We had people who were clearly experts in nutrition, some of whom who believed the work, some of whom who didn't believe the work. And at the end of 5 days of discussing all the available data, we came to a unanimous agreement that yes, indeed, these things were true. And then we had to let the world know that. Now, these are old days. So I went into a room that had a computer and a printer. I wrote a paragraph. Everybody agreed with the conclusions in the paragraph. Everybody signed it in blood. Well, not really, but intellectually in blood. And then I asked everyone when they went home to publish in a little editorial or a commentary their feelings about the results of this meeting. So I published something in the Lancet, somebody published something in the Medical Journal of South Africa, somebody in the Indian Journal of Pediatrics, and so forth. So within about 4 months, the C part, the convinced part, became the law of the land, from lots of arguments to, look, people who are experts and very thoughtful, they've all come to agreement. And that allowed the Director General of WHO and of UNICEF to come together, and they were the ones who launched the global vitamin A distribution program. Now, you did ask me to comment on 2 or 3 of the slides. 2 of them, let me do 2 of them. One of them, you showed that nice dose response where children who had night blindness or night blindness and Beto spots were at increasing risk. They also had their vitamin A levels were lower. If you had night blindness, you have slight vitamin A deficiency. If you had Beto spots, you had a little bit more mild vitamin A deficiency. That's the way we thought of vitamin A deficiency in those days. As you said, everybody was night blind when they were pregnant. I mean, this was considered a normal part of life. And so Beto spots and night blindness was considered very mild forms of vitamin A deficiency. And it was quite by accident. I mean, I went to Indonesia to study the eye, the implications of vitamin A status it had on the eye. And as we're analyzing the data, we discover, whoa, wait a minute here. It looks like it's having a big impact on mortality. The children with very mild vitamin A deficiency are dying at much higher rates than the children who had relatively normal vitamin A status. Nobody had normal vitamin A status in Indonesia in the rural areas. But at least those with better vitamin A without the signs of night blindness and Beto spots were surviving much more readily. And it was that not only did children with mild vitamin A deficiency have an increased mortality, the more deficient they were, the higher mortality. So we had a dose-response relationship. We had an association, vitamin A deficiency, increased mortality, and it was a dose-response relationship. The more deficient, the higher the mortality. And that's what said, well, wait a minute, we don't know it's the vitamin A. It could be that the vitamin A is tracking along with something else that's also deficient, that's causing it. And the only way we can prove it was the vitamin A is say, let's just change vitamin A status. And how do you do that? You do a randomized trial. So you change absolutely nothing else. You randomize children. You give half of them vitamin A. The other half, you don't give vitamin A. So that's the only thing that you've changed. And we got, as you pointed out, this 35% reduction in mortality in the villages where the children were given vitamin A. So it was an accidental observation that we pondered, that we did the activity, that we got the results, but not everybody believed them. And then we had to convince the world by doing the trials over and over and over again. The other slide that you asked me to talk about was that you showed, well, two more. One was that you showed that the results in Moderator
Yes.
were better than the results.
Meta-analysis, if you can comment a bit on that.
Right. They had a lower mortality in their vitamin A distribution program. And the reason, I think, is quite simple. We haven't proved it, but the reason was quite simple. The way they did the vitamin A distribution is they gave smaller amounts more frequently. We were trying to do it in a way that we thought it could be a real program, give it twice a year. But to really prove it, they gave it like every week or every 2 weeks, a smaller amount. So they really improved vitamin A status better than we were improving vitamin A status. So I think that's probably the reason that they got the larger mortality, and that would be better. The other thing that you showed, slide that you showed, was the one showing that, in fact, where the FAO conversion rate of beta carotene, which was very high, it said, oh, a lot of beta carotene becomes vitamin A. All the kids should really have adequate amounts of vitamin A. And every time anyone did a study, they found that wasn't the case. Most of the kids did not have adequate vitamin A. She said, there's something wrong with this. And that's when other people did the studies that showed that the conversion rate of beta carotene in some foods to vitamin A was not nearly as efficient as the assumption that was made about 40 years ago now, and that was really less efficient. And if you really went to the work that was done by the Dutch and showed how inefficient it was, particularly from things like green leafy vegetables. So fruits were better, green leafy vegetables less. If you did that, it was like instead of 24 molecules to make one molecule, the FAO was saying you needed 6 molecules. Well, suddenly, that's why every place you did a study, the children were vitamin A deficient, regardless of what the FAO food composition tables showed. So, you know, again, it's a wonderful example, I think, which is the way I tend to do things, is this spat. You see something new, you think about it because it looks interesting, and if you think there's something wrong here, or it means something differently, you have to act on it, which means doing the necessary research. And then just doing necessary research doesn't mean you've convinced anybody. You then have to do the convincing part. And we went through all of that with the vitamin A story, as we did with the others. So again, you know, thank you very much for this lovely honor and for summarizing a life's worth of work.
Yes.
Professor Sommer, I would like to ask, you know, you are working in Bangladesh, where the issues were not, you didn't look at vitamin A at that time.
Right, absolutely.
And then how did you suddenly get interested in vitamin A? I mean, what was the, you know, you said you see something, you beautifully put that word SPAC. So why it happened in Indonesia and why you didn't look at it in Bangladesh?
You know, most of my life work has been entirely accidental. So I got introduced to vitamin A because there was a wonderful woman, Susan Pettis, who was then came to work for HKI, and they had just started a blindness prevention program. Up until then, HKI was called something else, the American Foundation for the Overseas Blind at the time, and they were originally set up to help people who were blind. And they had been doing that since World War I.
Yes.
And then they decided about the time I got into ophthalmology and was in the early 1970s, was a resident training in ophthalmology, that maybe they should do something about preventing blindness. And Susan Pettis put together an advisory committee, which did not have me on it. I was a young resident. You know, I was just finishing my epidemiology degree at Hopkins and had just started learning about ophthalmology. And it turned out, like everything in life is an accident, it turned out that Susan Pettis had on her advisory committee the chairman of my department of ophthalmology, because they had both grown up together in Mobile, Alabama. And so she asked him to be on her committee, and he said, okay. And then when I came along, he said, well, wait a minute, there's this young guy who's actually lived, you know, in places like Bangladesh, where children go blind, and you say that there's some interest in vitamin A deficiency and maybe it causes eye disease and blindness, why don't you have him on your committee? So I ended up being on her committee and learning about vitamin A, which I knew nothing about. But I asked questions again. I said, well, how do we know it's a deficiency? How do we know how common it is? And certainly, how do we know how to prevent it? And so that launched my career in vitamin A, doing some studies in Central America, El Salvador to begin with, and then in Haiti, looking at how common vitamin A deficiency was, how commonly they had eye disease, because then everybody was focused on vitamin A is a problem with the eyes. Yes. So I'm an ophthalmologist and I'm an epidemiologist. Okay, so let's learn more about vitamin A in the eyes. And then I eventually go to Indonesia when I finished my residency. I was able to get a big grant to answer all the questions we want to answer about vitamin A deficiency and eye disease. And most of the studies were set up. The study which revealed the relationship between the mortality and vitamin A status, that was not the purpose of that study. The purpose of that study was to say, I asked the question, why do some children in a village become vitamin A deficient and the other children in the same village don't become vitamin A deficient, don't become so severely? So we would examine the children once every 3 months and do a pediatric exam, a dietary history, a socioeconomic thing, an eye exam. And so every 3 months we could recategorize. And the idea was to then look back after 18 months of this, look at what was the association between all these other variables and why a child became vitamin A deficient. And out of that fell the observation that, in fact, the mild vitamin A deficiency increased mortality. So you never know where you're going to go, is my expectation, particularly the way I approach life. And to get to some place where you never know where you're going to go is you have to look at something. If it looks funny, act upon it. And if the acting upon it gives you results that are worth doing something about, then you have to convince the world to do something about it.
That's brilliant. No, I just want to ask that the training you had in public health, did it help you much when you went there? Because equipments were not there, methods were not available. So how did you manage to?
Well, the training in epidemiology was absolutely critical because it got me to think about the ways I would collect data and the ways in which I would analyze data. So I didn't, it was 1 year's worth of epidemiology. Many people spend 5-6 years learning it really in depth. At that point in time, life is different today than it was 50 years ago. But in those days, what I needed to know is I actually was born thinking epidemiologically. That's the way my mind works. But I didn't know the correct rules for how to think. And so in that year, I did nothing but take epidemiology and biostatistics, and it helped to refine the way I would think about how to set up a study or how to collect data. So most of it has all been an accident. It's all been acting upon one accident after another accident, or one coincidence after another coincidence, and taking advantage of those coincidences when they came along.
But I want to ask, in Indonesia, how did they allow you to do a placebo? Because children were showing a lot of improvement. Didn't they object to you doing a placebo?
You're absolutely right. We were not allowed to use a placebo in Indonesia. We did placebos in the subsequent studies. But what they allowed us to do was they were convinced that they should give vitamin A to children in a particular area that we had identified in Sumatra where vitamin A deficiency was very common. They were going to start their first vitamin A distribution program there. But they couldn't cover all 500 villages at the same time. They had to train people, how to do it, how to give it out, how to be sure they gave it out. So they had worked out that it was going to take them 5 years before they could cover all the villages they wanted to include in the program. So what we asked them to do is, since they wouldn't let us use a placebo, let us randomize the villages for when they began the study, when they began the program. So we could begin looking at the same time, the villages that were beginning the program, those were the active villages, and the control villages were the villages that were going to not begin the program for another 2 years. Okay. So we took advantage. We had to think up a new way to do it since we couldn't use the placebo, and they gave us a natural way to do it, to say, okay, it was going to take them 5 years to enroll villages and train workers for the program. Let us randomize those 500 villages so that we can begin looking at villages in which you are introducing the program and combine them with villages which we randomize, so that it should end up the same, randomized to end the program later. Which brings me to the other point is, when you do a randomized trial, you always try to prove at the end that the children or the people in the control and the random arm were really the same, and they really were at the same risk, and it was really your intervention that made all the difference.
Yes.
That's exactly what Keith West did in the slide that you showed about the Nepal trial.
Right.
Nepal let us do a randomized trial. We did the randomized trial. We had to stop it early because it showed a dramatic impact of giving the vitamin A in the children who were randomized to get the vitamin A versus the children who were randomized to get the placebo. But rather than just stop the study, which is usually what people do, and then say, well, if we look at their age and their sex, they really are the same, they've got to be the same kids, we decided, well, let's prove they're the same kids. So let's switch the vitamin A for the placebo in the placebo recipient villages, but not tell anybody because they all look the same. And so that's the way we were able to show in those last two segments of the slide that you showed, that once we swapped the vitamin A for the placebo without telling anybody that we had done that is, so the field workers didn't know, that the mortality in the two groups of villages became identical. So it was a way of proving what you try to prove indirectly at the end of the usual randomized controlled trial.
How did you hit upon giving an oral one when the practice was to give an injection?
Oh, so that was another experiment, another accident. We had, while I was still a resident in ophthalmology at Hopkins, there was a WHO meeting in Indonesia to sort of bring together everything that was known about vitamin A deficiency. And I always thought it was a really big meeting. Whenever I've gone and looked back at the Blue Book technical report series that came out, there were like 12 people, and the rest were all Indonesians who had come to watch. And one of the questions that was posed was, what's the most effective way to give vitamin A? And people who knew much more about the biochemistry of vitamin A than I did pointed out that in the literature, they found, so the most commonly used vitamin A at the time was a lipid injection, an injection of vitamin A in oil, because vitamin A is oil soluble. And what these people pointed out is, if you looked at one experiment that was actually done where they injected into rats this lipid vitamin, subcutaneously or intramuscularly, it did absolutely nothing to the vitamin A status. And so the recommendation was made to change to water miscible vitamin A, and to give it injectably, an injection of water miscible vitamin A, like homogenized milk, homogenize the oily vitamin A into a water miscible, because that would give a bigger response in the injection. So then a couple of years later, I go off to Indonesia and set up all these studies. And one of them is, my office was in the biggest eye hospital in Indonesia. And I insisted that they call me when any child came in with any form of vitamin A deficiency. And they called me, and a child came in, and he already had corneal xerosis. He had corneal ulcerations. This is a child who was in really serious trouble. And so I turned to my Indonesian colleagues and I said, well, get me 200,000 units of water miscible vitamin A. And they looked at me like I was an idiot, which I was. As it turned out, even though we had made this recommendation to use water miscible vitamin A, there was no water miscible vitamin A being made anywhere in the world. So we had made this wonderful recommendation, which absolutely nobody had paid any attention to. Fortunately, I remembered that I had seen one of the papers I had read at that conference in Indonesia is about them giving that same oily vitamin A, not by injection, to rats, but by mouth. I said, all right, get me the oily vitamin A if that's all that we have, and I'll squirt it in the kid's mouth, which is what I did. And then immediately went and sent the telex. Remember telexes? We used to send telexes for emails to my colleagues at Roche. And I said to them, could you please make me some water miscible vitamin A? And they said, yes, we can do that, but it's going to take 3 or 4 months because we have to formulate it. Then we have to do toxicity testing. Then we have to get a license from the Indonesian government. And I said, okay, well, I'll live with it, but do it as quickly as you can. So for those 4 months, I'm treating children and getting very good results, just squirting oily vitamin A into their mouth. Then cases arrived of the water miscible injectable vitamin A from Roche. And so I said, God, I don't think we need this stuff. This stuff is very expensive. It's hard to get. And so I did a randomized trial, which is published, in which half the children who came in with bad corneal ulcers, that is, relatively severe vitamin A deficiency, and half of them got the old oily stuff by mouth, and the other half got the water miscible injection, and they came out exactly clinically, because we were able to do is measure retinol levels, and clinically, I took pictures every day of their corneas to see how quickly and had somebody else read them to see how quickly they were healing, and you got absolutely exactly the holo-RBP response, the biochemical response, and the clinical response were absolutely identical for the two. I presented that at an IVAC meeting, and of course, nobody believed it, and they wouldn't change the WHO recommendations. So I had to keep doing it again and again. And eventually, after 10 years of presentations, we got WHO to recommend giving it orally by mouth, but you could give it by injection if it was water miscible, and you could get water miscible. It was allowable to give it by injection. So it was, again, one of these accidental things. The recommendation was made. Nobody had acted on the recommendation. I was stuck in Indonesia without the recommended dosing. Fortunately, remembered one research paper and came up with the idea that we could get away with the old oily vitamin A as long as we gave it by mouth. And that's why the capsules are all given by mouth. And you don't need a needle, and you don't need a syringe, and you don't need a medically trained individual. So it's infinitely cheaper and easier to do. But again, that was by accident because there was nothing. The WHO recommended dosage wasn't available, so I couldn't use it.
Very
Impressive.
It's a life of accidents, just taking advantage of accidents and local coincidences.
Lalita, you wanted to ask some question?
No, I mean, I'm wondering whether Keith wants to respond and Martin Bloom, Dr. Krishnan, because I think the question that I had, how did you go about your public health journey that he's spoken about? How the work led to impacting lives and child health, demonstrating the evidence. He's clearly articulated that from the person himself. And then, why did you study them? Yes, by accident, but one led to the other. And then you also said, how do you persevere and pursue? I think this acronym of SPAC is wonderful.
Wonderful,
note it down, and we should keep it. I was wondering, Professor Sommer, if you want to make a little comment on the, the glaucoma and retinal degeneration. And I know
I think that'll confuse everybody.
Okay. Otherwise, some of those things, because this is of immense interest in elderly. So
I'll tell you one short story. Again, I was still a resident at the time, and I became aware of something that a famous neuro-ophthalmologist in San Francisco, Hoyt, had written a letter to the editor of The Lancet saying that he thought very early in glaucoma, because glaucoma is a disease, open-angle glaucoma disease the patient's totally unaware of.
Yeah.
And they don't become aware of it basically until they've entirely destroyed their optic nerve. And he said if he looked at glaucoma patients, he could see these little defects in their nerve fibrillea in the back of the eye. Now, I happen to have, 3,000 photos of people very early in their glaucoma, and some people before they developed glaucoma from a study that had been done long before I was a resident, but they just were sitting there unused. So I was looking through them of interest and thought I could see these same little slits long before they got glaucoma. So I asked a colleague of mine who had gone and done a 3-month fellowship with Professor Hoyt in San Francisco, where he really learned to identify these things. I mixed up all the slides, so he couldn't tell whose slides belonged to whom. And I said, because I knew he wasn't going to look at 3,000 slides. I figured the most I could get him to look at was 100 slides. I said, I knew about 20 of them were people who were anywhere from 10 years to 1 year before they developed glaucoma. And I said, Neil, you just put down a plus next to those which you think is a nerve fiber defect.
Right.
And he gave it he did it that night, and he did the 100 slides. He gave them back to me, and I looked at them, and the data were fabulous. He was able to identify 60% of the people who are going to get glaucoma, as we then defined it by visual field defects, almost everyone, 80% of them 6 years before they ever developed a visual field defect, made it the earliest indicator of somebody on the path to glaucomatous blindness that we could possibly have. And I sent this off to a journal, which of course immediately rejected it as ridiculous. And then we sent it to a second journal, which did end up publishing it. But it's one of those, I tend to keep rejection letters and some of the more interesting acceptance letters. And this letter I've kept and made a slide of, and it says, Dear Dr. Sommer, our editorial board has had a long discussion about this paper, and in the end, we've decided to publish it, although the data are hardly believable. Nerve fiber layer assessment is now, 30 years later, the primary way that you make a diagnosis of early glaucoma and initiate treatment, long before there are any other changes. So, sometimes you get way ahead of the curve, and you're usually going to get a rejection letter, and you got to I live with a lot of rejection letters and a lot of, okay, we'll publish it, but we don't believe it. There was Vivek was on before, and Vivek Varma had his hand up, I think.
Yeah, Vivek, yeah.
I think it's an absolute honor to listen to you as well as Dr. Lalita about the fantastic contribution towards vitamin A. My only question has got nothing to do with science. I mean, at least the scientific part of it. I just want to know as to what do you think should ease your advice to the present day doctoral students who would like to aim to do such fantastic work like yours? And I would like to put this forward to Dr. Alfred as well as to Dr. Lalita.
Okay. Well, Lalita, do you want to answer first?
No, I think when you're there, I'm not going to speak.
I'm going back to my temporary little term here, which I'm going to change because it's, but I only came up with the SPAC thing. It is, you're going to see things for the first time. Some of them are going to seem kind of strange or interesting. So you're going to ponder them. You're going to think about them. And if they're interesting enough on pondering them, you're going to act on them. That means you're going to do some research or something. And then you're going to end up having to convince people. So SPAC is the acronym. See, ponder, act, convince. Now I'm going to tell you a non-research question that happened to me. So I finally finished my training in ophthalmology, my residency. Then I went to Indonesia to do my early vitamin A work. Then I went to England to write up the book that Lalita has earlier referred to, the first book. And then I had to come back, and since I was a real ophthalmologist at Hopkins, I had to get involved with the American Academy of Ophthalmology. And there are many Indian members now, but then every American ophthalmologist had to be a member of the American, like 20,000 people. And I go to my first meeting and I see there's a common motto that they use all the time. And I used to see on TV when I was a kid. It's every American needs an annual eye examination. So I'm seeing this now really for the first time, having been trained in epidemiology and ophthalmology. Every American needs an annual eye exam. And I'm thinking, why does every American need an annual eye exam? Most eye problems you're aware of. Early glaucoma, you're not. But most eye problems, you have something in your eye, or you have a cataract, so you're not seeing clearly. You go to an ophthalmologist. And not only that, on the back of an envelope while I was sitting and listening to lectures, I calculated how many hours of ophthalmologist time would be taken up if every American got an annual eye exam every year. It turned out it would take up all the time of every ophthalmologist, and they would never be able to do anything else, like treat anybody for anything. So it made absolutely no sense to me at all. And so I had the temerity, as I usually do, to go to the leadership of the American Academy of Ophthalmology and said, this motto makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. It is not based in any evidence. It's based in some thoughts you had, but it's not based in any evidence whatsoever. So you know what happens is when you criticize something, you become the chairman of a committee to deal with it. You're given a job. And so the job I was given was to start a new committee called the Quality of Care Committee to make recommendations based on evidence and data as we saw it. And when I have to put together a committee, I usually find my friends who I think are open-minded and like to be data-driven and will work on evidence and are friendly and like working together. And we did come up with a whole series. This is the early 1980s. So this is something that today would be called clinical guidelines in every major area of ophthalmology. Now, in the early 1980s, you were not allowed to call things clinical guidelines. It was politically totally unacceptable. It was cookbook medicine because every patient is different from every other patient, and you can't tell me how I should treat my patient. So lots of middle of the night discussions between me and the board of directors of the Academy. I came up with a different term. They still today, they're very popular. They update them beautifully every year. I have had nothing to do with them for years. They do a great job. And they're all very much evidence-based, and all the evidence is assessed and graded and what have you. But we called it PPPs, Preferred Practice Patterns. Preferred. You don't have to do it this way. But on the other hand, we think this is probably the best way you ought to do it if you look at the existing data. Pattern, because we understand every patient is different than every other patient, and not all patients are going to be treated the same. But on average, this is the way we would treat a glaucoma patient. This is the way we would treat a cataract patient. This is the way we would treat a retinal detachment. Now, we're not telling you have to treat your particular patient this way, but on average, the pattern of treatment probably ought to look like this. Preferred practice patterns. That has not changed. It's still what they're now called, 35 years later. They're really taken very seriously. And a couple of years ago, the Academy leadership asked me to tell a little history of the origin of the preferred practice patterns. And I gave, a 1-hour little lecture about how we went from nothing to this. And the person who is presently chairman of the Quality of Care Committee, under whom the preferred practice pattern sits, a relatively young man, came up to me and he said, "That was terrific. I just thought these things always existed. I didn't know they had a history to them." Well, of course, nothing always existed. Everything has a history to them. It's just whether the person who started is still alive to give you the history or not. So I then wrote an editorial. So if anybody, after I'm dead, people can still read the history of how these things came about. So in my, in general, again, the answer to your question is you take advantage of the opportunities you have. You use the tools that you have. If you would like more tools and not too complicated, you probably can get them on the side or in a year's study. Yeah, if they're very sophisticated molecular biology, forget it. That's another world entirely, and I don't get into that world.
That's true. Movik, following up from what Professor Sommer has said, I believe, on a practical note, looking at the lessons learned, what have happened over the years, and if we can come up with something really concrete that can change lives. And over here, I would like to, again, ask Professor Sommer, if he can, to comment a little bit on the non-ocular effects of vitamin A deficiency. And I say this because today, while the world is more healthy, we have more, yes, there is still inequity, but we have much more knowledge. Children today are taller, we are healthier, whatever we may say, people live longer. So I'm just wondering, and we know the role of vitamin A in immunity, especially with reference to cancer preventions and the famous, I remember the work on the Lixion trials, and they were discontinued, but the vegetables and fruits, especially with reference to carotenoids, and there's an epidemiological relationship between consumption of vegetables and fruits and cancer prevention. This is another thing that there's a lot of work going on, I remember even being involved in this kind of work, but how much of it really can prevent or control? This is one big question. We don't have an answer. And I know it may not be possible to get an answer, but if you can throw a bit of light on that. And certainly in terms of immunity today, which is an important issue that's looming large, if we can divert a bit, not divert, but if we can focus a little bit on the role of vitamin A, although we don't talk about vitamin A in isolation, we have zinc, we have protein, we have so many things. But if you can touch a little on that, I think that will be helpful in terms of looking at newer areas.
Yeah, well, let me also invite Martin Bloom or Keith West to jump in. They know a lot more about the details in this than I do. We did get interested in immunity because when we obviously there was some way that it was reducing mortality, and largely it was reducing mortality by preventing children from dying from at least infectious diseases was one of the major things, particularly measles and diarrhea.
Yes.
And so we actually went ahead and did, again, I'm a simple-minded guy. Now I'll turn it over to Keith. I'm a simple-minded guy, right? So I figure, all right, well, what are we going to do about immunity here? We got to look at and see what it does to immunity. And so Richard Semba, who was then a fellow of mine, I said, well, why don't we go out and get a group of kids in Indonesia, we knew on average they're going to be vitamin A deficient, and give half of them vitamin A and half of them placebo. And then 2 weeks later, we're going to give them a tetanus toxoid, which they would ordinarily get anyway. And then we're going to, 2 weeks after that, or a month after that, we're going to look at the immune response to those who were given vitamin A, those who weren't given vitamin A, to the tetanus toxoid shot that we gave them. And of course, the ones who were given vitamin A had infinitely greater responses, both humoral immunity and cellular immunity. So it's a very simple-minded experiment. I know very little about the complexities of the immune response, but I certainly know when IgG and IgM values go up geometrically greater in one group than another, and the cellular immunity response goes up much greater in one group than the other, and it was all in the group who had gotten vitamin A 2 weeks earlier. So let me ask Keith or Martin if they'd like to say something. And you'll have to, that's it, unmute yourselves.
I have a choice: unmute and hear a lawnmower in the background, or stay muted and be quiet.
I don't hear the lawnmower.
Good. I would just add, I think what we've learned is that vitamin A, timing is everything in life. And vitamin A we see being required for resolving inflammation, resolving the infectious disease process, and therefore reducing the severity of an illness. It doesn't stop the illness from the infection from occurring. It reduces the severity of it, and that through that you see the reduction in mortality. And there is data now showing resolution is an active program in the immune system, and vitamin A plays a very important role in that. So I would just add, while I've got the mic, that even after 40 years, it's wonderful to hear and invigorating to hear Al talk about these issues. It is, Al, I don't know, but this is our 40th anniversary year. You probably don't recall that, but you're as refreshing today as you were, in 1981. And the only thing that I would add to your SPAC, I don't have a good acronym, but I would add some measure, some word that has a P in it. It can be persevere, it can be pursue, it can be persist, it can be policy, but don't forget the findings that you convince people on, because policy is like a garden. It needs to be weeded every once in a while, and you need to pay attention to that policy garden. Martin,
you got something to say?
Well, it's a bit different, but I must say, Al was my hero too when I was doing my PhD work, and after I finished my medical degree. But what I've learned from Al is something what I think Keith just said. Like, if you work in policy, and I worked quite a long time in policy, HIV/AIDS as well as, of course, nutrition, is that you really have to understand who are the decision makers.
Right.
And when you understand who are the decision makers, then you have to do things. And if you have a concept, and that concept needs to be translated in a different way, then you need to do it, because otherwise you can't save lives. And I think the most brilliant idea that I think Al showed was that vitamin A was, of course, linked with blindness and was not linked with mortality. And people had the knowledge, but nobody was doing something, because mortality was more important than blindness. And when Al organized his meeting in New York, that was so incredibly critical, because he said, we don't gonna examine anymore, we don't gonna research whether vitamin A deficiency is a problem in the country or not. But when you have a certain level of mortality, you need to act, and vitamin A deficiency will contribute to the reduction of mortality. That was extremely brilliant, but very practical. And certainly many ministers of health, as well as the ministers, even the finance minister, could actually invest. And I think that's the type of things which we don't see anymore too much.
Yes.
The translation of research in a way so that policymakers can make decisions which are not too complicated. Anyway, I still use a lot of the vitamin A examples to people working in food systems, because quite often they think that it's just one truth. It's not. It's being practical and understanding what your ultimate goal is. And the ultimate goal of vitamin A deficiency was mortality reduction among children.
Yeah.
And if you want to accomplish that, try to do it, and don't start to argue about whether it's a problem of vitamin A deficiency or not. Anyway, that's just. I am very grateful, and I must, to Keith just said, I really enjoyed this morning already. Like, yes, it's early in the morning, but it was worth it to listen.
I just want to ask one question. Like folic acid is given to pregnant women today. Do you think vitamin A should be given to pregnant women so that the child develops well?
This is maybe Professor Sommer, Martin. There has been a controversy on this in the recent, I would say, 10 years ago, and there are many activists who are. So maybe you can, Keith West, I think you should be able to answer this as well.
Yeah, Keith, why don't you talk about that?
Well, if they're deficient, if women are deficient, they need it. It's an essential nutrient. And so it's a question of both timing and dose amount. A recommended dietary allowance is safe and is enough to prevent the occurrence of night blindness and deficiency issues. So yes, it's needed, and like all nutrients in nutrition, as we know, the balance is important. So, a proper diet and low dose supplementation, if that's what is required to keep women healthy, yes, it is needed. But there are safety issues that need to be always considered, and vitamin A is one of those, along with most other nutrients.
Right.
But
So, I mean,
yeah, sorry, please, sir.
No, go ahead. Well, I was just going to say, just to encapsulate what Keith said, perhaps more briefly, is American women all get vitamin A. I mean, everything is fortified in the United States with vitamin A. Milk has vitamin A in it. White bread has vitamin A in it. Everything has vitamin A. So you're not going to find too many American women who are vitamin A deficient.
Yeah.
But as Dr. Bhattacharjee mentioned, there were not too long ago times when half the women in a village who in their third trimester of pregnancy were night blind. And it was taken as normal. I love to use that example, by the way. You know, I love to ask students, you know, what do we think is, what unusual thing happens in pregnancy, early in pregnancy, that everyone thinks is normal? And they said, well, it is normal. It's you know, early, when they vomit early and they get nauseated during the first trimester. I said, well, why should that be normal? I mean, why should women normally get morning sickness just during their first trimester of pregnancy? There's a Nobel Prize hiding in there somewhere. I just don't know how to get it.
Correct. I agree. But the developmental biologists have done a lot of nice work using vitamin A, you know. I mean, development biology seems to indicate that vitamin A is very important for development. But somehow this has not been translated into human trials. Am I right?
Yeah.
So there's just to add to that comment, because it's really insightful. We have followed up the Nepal cohorts of children who were born to women in the trial that Al mentioned, or that Lalita mentioned, about reducing maternal mortality. And when we followed up those children 10, 12 years later, they had better lung function, forced expiratory volume at 1 second, forced
Expiratory volume.
Yeah, expiratory volume. Their innate immune system was stronger. And so there's evidence that exactly that, Professor Kannan, that you know, if you take care of a deficiency early in life, in fetal origins, you can see developmental differences later in life. And it gets to a phrase that I use: that once randomized, always randomized. If the intervention is early in life, you put a cohort of the next generation on a different trajectory.
I just would like to ask one more last question. You know, a lot of people are talking epigenetics. Does vitamin A deficiency cause some epigenetic changes which are carried over to the next generation? Has anybody studied this?
Say that again. Can you repeat that?
Say, you know, the Dutch hunger syndrome, where they say that epigenetic changes are transmitted to the offspring.
Yeah.
A lot of interesting studies have been done. So I was wondering whether vitamin A deficiency in women and the children born to them, do they transmit that to the next generation?
Yeah, I don't have any idea. It's something worth studying.
Yeah.
It's a challenge for the next generation of nutrition scientists. You know, we're in the age of public health biology,
Yes.
and that would be a wonderful area to investigate.
Because I was very fascinated with Dutch hunger syndrome, you know, and you know, that's how the epigenetics and, you know, Azim Zurani and all are doing a lot of beautiful work on that. But I thought vitamin A would be a good example to look at. Whether night blindness is a genetic trait transmitted, whether it's a Lamarckian principle. I don't know in your studies whether you came across somebody that every family there is a night blinded person. Have you come across that?
No.
Generation after generation.
No, it's still, I mean, in our work, it's primary. Now, we haven't been looking at the sophisticated material that you're quoting, but in our work, you know, it just tended to have to do with what people were eating in the family.
Yeah. Okay.
But I think across public health in medical schools and across, I mean, especially in the developing world, they track mothers, women who are during pregnancy for night blindness signs. And absolutely, they are immediately intervened and treatment is given because it's not normal. But, we've had all these superstitions, beliefs which abounded then. Now you don't find night blindness and without spots. It's not that common. I don't think, in fact, the prevalence is very low in India and in other countries.
Okay.
This certainly has been a big change.
Change.
Keith is working on this with Bangladesh and, Nepal as well. And so I think if we have any response on that, it will be helpful to.
Yeah.
Well, I think people are in general better nourished now from their regular diets, and there's still programs in place, but I would bet, and it's only a bet on my part, you could do the work and uncover it, that people are in general better nourished than they were 30 years ago, 40 years ago. I mean, I watched that happen in Indonesia. During the 4 years I lived there, people's socioeconomic status in the rural areas improved. Just, I don't know what happened, but it just got better. People were living in better houses or real houses instead of mud huts. And you could see motorcycles appearing where you didn't see them before, and a more varied diet than you had seen before, more fish being eaten. So it depends on where you are, of course. Some places in the world are very poor and people's nutrition is not improved. But in India and Indonesia, in general, there'll always be pockets of people who will not have improved. But I think their general food has improved. Martin might have something to say about it. He has to worry about used to have to worry about this all the time.
Yeah, no, it is very clear that particularly in Asia, but also even in Africa, that because of the GDP growth in many Asian countries, the situation has improved considerably. But this is why it's so interesting that even when people are getting better fed, you don't see the clinical signs anymore of vitamin A deficiency. Vitamin A deficiency is still very prevalent. So it's one of those which fortunately we don't have a discussion anymore, but people were saying, oh, we can stop the vitamin A supplementation programs. But that is a discussion which we had like 20 years ago, but not anymore, because it's an incredible important strategy and still relatively very cheap. So it is what I would like to bring back is, what Elle said about the study in India, the daily dose or the weekly dose, the bi-weekly dose. It's really interesting. So you can see that when you start to improve the content, like your nutrition intake through vegetables and fruits, but at the same time you have the vitamin A capsule program. That's the really interesting combination. And we had 20 years ago, we had this discussion, is this better than the other one, which is a ridiculous discussion. You need multiple strategies to tackle these problems. And I think, fortunately, we don't have that anymore so much. Like, we are much more realistic and say, it's GDP growth is essential, but it will not solve all the problems. We still have to do some other intervention. We need health intervention. We need, structural intervention. Although I must say that at the global level, there is not enough attention to nutrient content. Everything is healthy diet. What does it mean, healthy diet, from a nutrient perspective? So, which is one of my concerns.
I agree.
That's
but I just would like to just ask, what is the difference between WHO guidelines and FAO guidelines? There seems to be some contradiction on vitamin A.
No, the FAO doesn't. Well,
somebody says it is a somebody says you supplement. Somebody uses the word nutritional factor.
Martin, do you want to respond, and I can respond after that?
Well, it is a good question, but FAO is of course an agency who deals with food production, and so they always will promote food production as the key solution. And if you are WHO, your physicians, of course, they like to see a different strategy, like a more medical strategy, which is of course captures more medical strategy. But I must say that in the last couple of years, you see much more, I would say, at least synthesis between what's
Yes.
going on with,
Yes.
with FAO and WHO. There's not anymore too much controversy. But having said that, I really thought it was very interesting that you showed that slide, Lalita, on the conversion rate, because
Yes.
Saskia, the P, was very much involved in that work, looking
Yes.
into. And I can tell you, in Rome, they still take the old conversion rates, and you still have this idea that vegetables are the main source for vitamin A, which is just not true. It's an important source, an additional source, but it's not. You cannot solve the problem of vitamin deficiency with vegetables, and maybe a little bit better with fruit, but fruits are expensive, so that also doesn't solve the problem. So I think we should, I don't work anymore there, but I think the conversion rate is something we should still put a lot of attention to, because people don't have a memory. They think, we still go, it's still 1 to 12 or 1 to 6, instead of, what's the reality.
But Martin, on a more general note, we look at food as, a mixture of things we are eating, and I know the intention is to promote a mixed diet. So yes, you may take leafy vegetables and yellow vegetables, but there is some amount of retinol sources in the diet as well. So I think when we talk about diversity, that is leading you more to getting your vitamin A supplies from the diet. I mean, wouldn't that be a better way to go? I know it's not easy. There is a question, as you rightly said, what is an affordable diet? What is this big, the Lancet diet, the Lancet Commission? There's a lot we can talk. That's another huge discussion. But what are your thoughts on that? We talk about moving away from a clinical approach to a food-based approach. This is being done. And since you've been with both the health side and the food side, I would like your thoughts.
Yeah, it's a very, very important question you ask. But my opinion is a minority opinion. So if you look at the trend of what nutrition is thinking about, what is the recommendation? If you go 20, 30 years back, we had a nutrient approach. We said, okay, this is what is needed. And then eventually it went to the more food groups, and now it's actually cultural, like you need to have an Italian diet, or you need whatever, but I think it's true when you think about the West. We don't need to worry too much about nutrients, but we need to worry about, the type of food we eat, processed, whatever. There's a lot of these issues. But when you have malnutrition rates, you still need a nutrient concept. And so, for example, when you're talking about the Eat Lancet diet, which is really interesting, because we looked in Indonesia, we just came out with a paper on that. So and that's the link between climate and diet. But the Indonesia data showed very clearly that when Indonesia wants to have an adequate diet in nutrients, it has to increase the production, and the climate impact will be there. So this is something with the current global nutritionists, they don't care about nutrients because it's a medical approach. We don't want that. But we need both, and this is one of the, I think, and Hopkins, this is one of the reasons why I'm so happy to be in Hopkins, because Hopkins has proven a track record that they have focused on nutrients. But the other schools are only focusing, like Harvard, for example, and not to criticize Harvard, but I think they only focus on almost like, I would say, the Western food pattern. And we still should not forget that we have many low middle income countries which need better nutrients. And I think vitamin A story is still extremely critical.
Relevant, yes.
It's really fun to listen today to Alan, to you. And I thought, wow, it is a story which is not over. We still have to tell this story.
Correct. Professor Muralidhar, you would like to make some, because he's a reproductive endocrinologist.
Yes, please.
And, because you are sharing some time.
First of all, I'm speechless because I'm seeing in blood and flesh great legend. I used to hear about him during my MSc program, where Dr. C. Gopalan used to take a couple of classes on nutritional deficiencies, and used to mention Sommer's as well as Nevin Scrimshaw on protein deficiency, and marasmus and others. But I had never had the opportunity to see him or hear him. And so it was a absolutely wonderful pleasure. and a delight and pride to see him in blood and flesh. In fact, his work, I'm nobody to compliment. Basically, it is nothing less than a miracle. That's why when I was reading Woodward's book, edited book on scientists greater than Einstein, the first chapter is on Alfred Sommer. So it is doubly thrilling to meet him in person, though virtual. Having said that, I'm reminded of sort of a philosophical analysis of why scientists do their work. And there is a famous belief given by Polanyi that it is purely ego satisfaction. For that, people do to show that somebody knows more than anybody else. But when you look at Sommers and others, I believe it is 3 C's that drive their work. Most important, compassion. And the second is conviction. And the third is competence, because they have science background. Only that will solve problems of public health. And their work is therefore greater than that of Einstein. Having said all that, come back to basic science. There was a discussion about the non-ocular role of vitamin A. And a mention was made about in morphogenesis, especially limb regeneration in lower vertebrates and invertebrates. There is also great work from Bangalore, Jagannath Ganguly, on the role of retinoic acid in reproduction per se.
Yes.
There's a lot of work, but what it tells us is that after these vitamins were available in medical stores, in pharmacy shops, scientists have stopped working on this. There are so many problems which are not yet answered. The most important thing is, while a deficiency syndrome can be corrected by giving a tablet or injection or whatever it is, what is the relation of the biochemical reaction in which this vitamin takes part to the pathological symptoms of degeneration or deficiency or the restoration of so-called health? WHO also does not know how to define health. The relation, this biochemical relation, I don't think it has been delineated. And as both in the case of vitamin A and in many other cases, new roles are being discovered. So this field should be revisited, especially biochemistry people, to discover much more than what we knew earlier. But I was impressed. Of course, as I said, I'm nobody to compliment, but I'm thrilled to have seen him in blood and flesh. Thank you, Kannan.
I think I think it was a very fruitful discussion, and I think I didn't feel Professor Al Sommer is nearing 80. He looked like a man of 20, still full of energy.
I used to have hair. Early picture.
So, but listening to you, many of us felt, why should we also should feel like you, to do something. And I think it was really inspiring, and I'm very fortunate that you agreed to be part, thanks to Lalita, who made the effort. And certainly I appreciate that, as Keith rightly said, we are celebrating 40 years of your work. I think it certainly is a great milestone, and I hope and I liked your book on advice to young scientists. I think I wish we had time to talk about it, but I think it's not fair to stretch your time. You have spent so much of time with us. Thank you so much. And Lalita, don't worry about the small goof up. It is okay. Don't worry. Don't get upset. It worked ultimately. That's more important.
Miserable when we started. My goodness.
No, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
It was terrific, and thank you, Lalita, for your very nice comments.
In fact, I didn't have to introduce Alfred Sommer, thanks to Lalita. She literally took your journey through, and it was so nice way of presenting. That I said, let Lalita do it. I don't want to add anything to it. And thank you so much, Keith, Martin, Professor Muralidhar, Vivek, Deepa, you didn't speak at all. Deepa, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah.
Please.
Deepa is one of
It
the
was
clinical trials here. Yeah, Deepa.
quite fascinating. Hello, everyone. I'm Deepa Subramaniam. I am a cousin of Dr. Krishnamoorthy's wife, Jayashree. And so I hold Kannan, if I may call you so, responsible for me being a scientist. He inspired me in the field of math and science when I was in 7th grade, when we lived in Hyderabad. And he had just returned from London to take a job at the Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology in Hyderabad. So, so he invited me to the session. This is the first of the sessions I'm attending. And it's truly humbling to watch you, Professor Sommer. I am in the Northern Virginia area and have been at Georgetown University for about 19 years. So I visited Hopkins many times. I'm an oncologist by background, but of course my interest is in science in general, being a scientist and a clinical trial researcher. So, but it's very fascinating to see the immensely impactful public health work that you have done over your lifetime. Very inspiring. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For your
She works for AstraZeneca as Director of Clinical Research.
Wow. Okay.
So,
Right.
so
I
she's
just
a very
recently
humble person, but I think she is establishing herself, which I feel very proud. So
Thank you very much.
thank you so much, and we close the thing. Have a nice day, all of you in USA, and good night to Lalita for staying so late. It's quite
It's
late.
10, yeah.
Yeah.
And stay safe, everybody.
Yeah. Okay. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so
Bye.
much. Yeah. Yeah. Bye-bye. Huh?